interesting actually about, building the end product, I guess, because we were pretty good at that. What we didn't do quite so well, which I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon, is the deployment of our e-learning. I think a lot of the things I'm going to talk about are relevant to the deployment of any kind of large-scale training initiative. But I do feel I need to apologise a bit because I'm full of this cold. So if I do start coughing and spluttering, please forgive me. On the other hand, of course, it makes me sound all sexy and husky. Well, I am currently single, and my details are up there on the screen. So let's go back then to this e-learning journey that I've been on the past couple of years. Well, it's been an interesting one with many positive experiences and outcomes. But we have learned a lot of valuable lessons. And hopefully we'll take them into account in the future. And you may well be able to learn from them if you're in the position now of either introducing e-learning to your organisation or perhaps producing e-learning courses bespoke and by yourself for the first time. So in the next 20 minutes or so then, I'm going to be covering really what you see up there on the slide. I'm going to be looking at the details of delivery. So in other words, what do you need to consider in practical terms when you're bringing e-learning to a screen near your employees? I'll also be looking at the vital role played by the local sponsors and the key stakeholders throughout the process, especially in deployment. And during our process, it says dealing with shocks there, we had a pretty big shock in that we had a complete management restructure in our stores. So as you can imagine, that proved quite a challenge and threw everything off for a good 6 to 8 months. Huge effect on the programme. And finally, I'll look at the importance of tracking both the usage and the effectiveness of any e-learning that you produce. So let's begin at the very beginning, because that's a very good place to start, as I think somebody said in the West End recently. So I can give you some brief background then now into where we were and the context for us deciding to produce e-learning. We're basically in a retail business, I'm sure Glynis will back this up as well, especially one like IKEA, where Hunt the Yellow Shirt is a game that most of our customers have to play because we don't have a great deal of staff. And so as you can imagine, we can't let them off the shore for a long period of time. So what we need then is flexible training solutions that can deliver really effective training in short bursts and short sessions, with limited or no need, of course, of a facilitator. So straight off you can see why e-learning was of great appeal to us. Now we did have some e-learning in the organisation, but it was limited in both scope from the point of view of topics, very limited audiences, and it was of pretty poor quality, to be perfectly honest. So my challenge then was to produce a range of e-learning courses which not only gave us really good solutions to real business needs, but would also enable us, as very much part of a pilot approach, to decide what's the best approach for e-learning in the organisation going forward, come up with a strategy, if you will. And on top of that, we needed to establish e-learning as an effective medium in the store and drive the quality of the end product, both at a national and a global level. So I was hoping to have your little clickers here as well, and I would like to point out it's nothing to do with the technology, that works fine. But we're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way, I'm afraid, and hands up. So, we were successful in quite a lot of areas. Where do you think we were the most successful? So I think it was A, technical rollout. Can we have a couple of hands up there? A couple there. Great final courses with good feedback. Okay, a few more, probably about half. So, completion rates. Oh, I can see there's a few of you who've never had to contend with rolling out e-learning, or certainly did better than we did, because it certainly wasn't that, unfortunately. And stakeholder buy-in. Yeah, okay, it was actually B. We actually ended up with fantastic courses. They were the right topics, they were great courses, and we got some excellent feedback, as you can see on the screen there, both qualitatively, and we saw that the transfer of knowledge from before doing the course to after was fantastic. So, the product was right. And let's have a quick look at those products. So, we produced 3 different courses. This is one here, a highly interactive sort of discovery style learning about stock accuracy or stock availability in our stores, which is a key issue. We then had one here about what we call Developing with IKEA, which is our introduction to the company and our career progression framework, as well as our performance management framework. And that talked about what Developing with IKEA meant as you entered the organisation. And then finally, a slightly more traditional, but nonetheless engaging programme about basic actions. So, is the store clean, tidy, priced and full and ready for the customer? Now, although there's a clear corporate look, the actual instructional design and the navigation around the course is very different in each three. Because as I said, a lot of this for us was about finding the right and most appropriate approach for the organisation and most importantly for the end users. So in spite of some pretty good positives, it wasn't all quite sailing. So again, what didn't go to plan? Do you think we didn't have easy access to e-learning in the store? Was that our key problem? Okay, oh, quite a few of you, okay. Insufficient follow-up. Stakeholder buy-in. And finally, all of the above. Well done, it was a trick question. It was, actually. Unfortunately, all of the above. So let's have a look at those then. Well, in a nutshell, it really was down to slow take-up. Ineffective deployment, not as good deployment as it could have been. During the process, it was pretty much a one-man band. Me, there was a group of stakeholders, which I'll talk about, and some fantastic suppliers. But I concentrated so much on getting the end product right, I didn't spend anywhere near enough time thinking about how we were going to deploy it and how the end users were going to consume it. So, for example, I knew that the stores would need a dedicated e-learning area. It wasn't something that could be done on the shop floor. And I knew that we'd need to produce a communications package and usage guides. But naively, however, I totally misunderstood and underestimated how difficult it would be to get the stores to actually use these guides and use these packages, and the time it would take from actually sending out the launch guides, if you like, and the launch materials, to actually seeing it in the stores and seeing these e-learning areas that we needed. It is amazingly difficult and political just to get a small room with a few PCs in when the world and his dog has an idea on how every last centimetre of the building should be used. So really don't underestimate that. And it was compounded by the fact that I did start working with the marketing department on producing these packages quite late on in the process and not long before the packages were actually ready. So of course that added to the time lag. So with hindsight, of course, I should have started this much earlier in the process. Much better to have e-learning rooms with no e-learning than e-learning with nowhere to actually do it, of course. But even without those physical facilities that we did need, we could, of course, have started advertising the arrival of this important initiative. Now, we did do this. It did happen in some stores, but it was inconsistent, sometimes no more than a couple of A4 posters, and it wasn't exactly done in a blaze of glory. Secondly, we did have some minor technical problems with getting people into the course, and that did cause some issue and actually getting through the courses. Now, just to sort of side on a little bit, interestingly, during the pilot, we experienced very, very little difficulty with access and navigation around the course, which of course worries a lot of people. And there were three, although the icons and everything we used are the same, there were three quite different ways of navigating around all of these courses. But it wasn't a problem. So one thing I would say is, it's a real mistake, I think as some people do, to go for the lowest common denominator, if you like, when producing e-learning. If we treat everybody as technophobes, then really it's going to play down the quality of what you can actually produce, and some of the exciting stuff will be missed that e-learning is capable of. Because these technophobes, these people who had problems all across the age scales, was really very, very limited indeed. So it's much better to go for the highly interactive courses and look, of course, after the minority in different ways. Sit with them while they're doing it, talk them through it, workshops, because you'll get a better end result, I think, if you do that. But we did find that the courses were jamming in the most strange places. It was completely indiscriminate, it wasn't always in the same issue, and there was no obvious cause. So this caused much consternation to both our learner management system and our course suppliers, because there was technically nothing wrong with the programs. They were absolutely fine. Of course, there were issues, but they were all sorted out in the alpha and the beta testing. But it did turn out that the stores were using what we call NCs, which are basically stripped down PCs with insufficient memory to actually run the programs. Now, this was in spite of the fact that in the lovely glossy launch pack, it clearly said they needed to use PCs and stated the technical specifications. So, of course, two key issues there. First of all, even the slightest problem can undermine the whole program and all the courses. All of a sudden, it becomes a load of rubbish in the eyes of the end user, which is understandable when they're getting frustrated about it. But of course, nothing spreads quite as quickly around the store and in the staff restaurant as negative publicity, and when things don't go right. And at the time, there was nobody obvious for the employee to turn to, so it could take a while to get solutions for any problems that did arise. And secondly, as good or as glossy as any documentation may be, it doesn't actually mean that anybody's going to bother to pick it up and read it. And even recently going around the stores, I've still found it all in this lovely, nice launch box with everything they need still unopened, which is really disheartening, I can tell you. And of course, if you want to cajole people and encourage them into use the e-learning, one good way of doing that is showing them how successful it has been. Now, we did have some reporting in the learner management system, but it was quite limited. When it was exported, it was fine to read on the screen, but exported, it was in a really sort of messy Excel spreadsheet, and I didn't give the stores access to get their own information quickly enough. It had to come through me. But finally, however, I'm pleased to say there was one thing which I mentioned earlier that I couldn't have foreseen, and that was the major management restructure in our stores. So it threw pretty much everything into chaos, and this only happened sort of throughout last year. And as you'd expect, L&D was one of the casualties, not from the point of view of the restructuring, but just from the point of view of everything all of a sudden being whacked back, because, of course, there was other things we had to worry about. So, after for the first time getting a team of L&D responsibles in store, we suddenly either lost them or they got really involved in the HR side of things. So their focus just really wasn't there. Now, I am pleased to say, however, that we are well on the way to resolving this issue, and things have settled down, but it knocked us back by a good 6, maybe even 12 months. So on balance then, a mix of some good, great products with great feedback that met our needs and did the job, and maybe not so good, with that not so good being born of a mix of naivety and inexperience, some poor planning, and of course, just some good old-fashioned bad luck. But as we say in IKEA, only when sleeping do we make no mistakes, and mistakes are good. It's true, and they're very good. You know, you can make 100 mistakes once, just don't make the same mistake 100 times. Meaning, of course, that we just need to learn from those mistakes. So now I can share that learning with you, although I'm sure most of you have come to exactly the conclusions that we very quickly came to. So what have we learned? Well, plan the delivery is an integrated part of the whole process. It can, of course, be done simultaneously with actually producing the programs. And, of course, it is better that that's in place, that your e-learning areas or your branding or your marketing is in place before the courses are ready. Although, of course, not too long before, because you don't want to create a lot of anticipation, then fall back. And, you know, show me one supplier that meets a deadline, and, yeah, I'll heartily congratulate you, although, to be fair, ours were pretty good. So think carefully about what you need from the point of view of space and facilities. Many of you, of course, will be able to have the e-learning delivered directly to your employees' workstations, although, of course, we couldn't do that. But even then, how are you going to market? What's in it for them? How are you going to get them to want to do the e-learning? Will they be able to access it from a single click on the desktop? How will you ensure their details are in the system for tracking? The more aware of what they will get from the e-learning and the easier it is for them to access, i.e. the fewer clicks the better, the more they're going to buy into it. Secondly, of course, have the right people in place integrated into the process. Now, as I said, we did actually half do this. We did involve end users and subject matter experts and some key line managers all the way through, which was pivotal to introducing excellent end products. But fundamentally, it was an HR-driven initiative. And so it was difficult to get the buy-in from the functions, the people who really should own and push these programs. Now, that is starting to happen, and our logistics function has taken the stock accuracy e-learning and made it a central plank of a new initiative that they're driving to improve stock availability in our stores. And that was done in no small measure because it is a great program. When people see it, they love it. I think if we would have put any old tat out there, then it would never have seen the light of day. So better late than never, but of course it could have happened earlier. It would have had more formal involvement from the function, and of course going forward, better still responding to a need from them, as opposed to sort of imposing the solution on them, however clear the needs are. But of course, if they hadn't been able to see what was possible, they may never have come to us. So it is a bit chicken and egg, I guess. Of course, having a dedicated sponsor in the store, whether that's in your HR department or preferably outside of the HR department, someone to champion the cause will make a big difference. Now, interestingly, one area where we have been very, very successful with our e-learning is in our 2 new stores. So when it was built into the build-up process, built into the new starter training, and it was championed by people new into the store with no baggage and new into IKEA, it was incredibly successful. And there we are getting completion rates of much nearer to 80 to 90%. So it's the existing stores, the operational stores, that were the key issue for us. And of course, that's the majority. And of course, be flexible. Now, I'm not sure that's more to do with a state of mind than any practical tips, but don't stress. You know, you'll get there in the end. And be prepared for anything that can go wrong, because it will. But of course, in our case, what really helped is we did pick topics, that had a really long shelf life. The type of thing that's about basic retailing, about basic people development that doesn't change much over time, doesn't age, and is easy to update. So they are still fresh. We have got a chance to start again. Of course, had it been something that was very timely, we would have just wasted and lost a lot of money. Then once you've got people actually using the courses, make sure you track it and communicate the information effectively to as many people as possible, because after all, success breeds success. If people aren't fully aware of what's happening, and most importantly, what the e-learning can do for them, then how can you expect them really to buy in? It's not just the end quality that matters. Plus, of course, use as many different communication channels as possible. Like I said earlier, a super fancy literature pack is great, but it means nothing if nobody's going to actually read it. And of course, it's best to use that perhaps as a reference and a reminder of the key message, which is always much better one-to-one or in seminars or the like. Then when you are promoting, make sure you are giving adequate support all the way through, but especially at the end, to your stakeholders, your sponsors, and your end users. In that way, when things do go wrong, you can respond quickly and mitigate any effects of negative publicity. Because, as I said, things will always go wrong, however good your planning or foresight. So what's important, as with any of these things, is how you deal with the issues and making sure that that confidence isn't lost. And of course, the one advantage of having a low take-up means that we have been able to nip a lot of the issues in the bud before it's got any negative feel. So there is still a good positive feel around what e-learning is in IKEA. So what have we actually done then? Because we have taken some immediate steps. Well, basically, hopefully we've learned from our lessons for future production, and like I say, we're hopefully improving the situation. So in brief, as part of a wider process, we've communicated individually to all our learning and development specialists in store, who are now back and up and running and getting into their jobs. And it's all about, what's this e-learning about, how are you responsible for it, how are you going to get buy-in from the end user and from the functions. Added to this, we've introduced a bit of competition, so we've now got a league table, which we're communicating on a weekly basis, because hopefully that will spur some additional take-up. Oh, sorry. And we're promoting e-learning far more heavily on our learning and development zone, which is part of our intranet. And that's promoting both the UK modules and the learning that's now coming from Sweden more and more, based primarily around product knowledge. But perhaps most of the significant step we've taken is to integrate the e-learning and make it a compulsory part of what we call our foundation level training. So basically, that's the training that an employee should complete in their first year. And it is tied to their first year pay rise. So it's incredible how much the demand goes up when they realise they ain't going to get paid if they haven't completed it. That's going to make a huge difference this year. So on a more serious note, a few minor things. We have set up an end user helpline. So again, the confidence is much greater knowing they can pick up the phone and talk to somebody who can generally solve their problem pretty easily. And we are improving the reporting from the LMS. So like I said, before we had fairly nasty sort of spreadsheets. Now we're looking at much clearer, easier to read PDF reports. And of course, that keeps on this theme of communication. So let's just distill then what I've learned and what I've covered in my personal e-learning journey into hopefully some top tips. So from the point of view of content, make sure you choose the right topics, initially with as long as shelf life as possible. Make sure that learning is enjoyable and it really engages the end user. In our experience, they really respond to as much interactivity and as much more discovery learning as possible, rather than the just read a page of information, click next, read a page of information and answer a few multi-choice questions. Doesn't really turn them on that much, to be honest. Make sure you've got that end support in place for when things do go wrong, and of course make sure that your infrastructure for delivering the e-learning, your PCs, your headphones, your printers, e-learning areas, etc., are all there in place. Preferably heavily branded and preferably before the courses are actually launched. Communicate well. Get all of your stakeholders on board, and I really do mean all of them because you'll inevitably miss some out. Get them on board early and keep them involved as far as possible. And I think, again, to echo what Glynis has said, the higher buy-in you can get from the higher up the organisation, it goes without saying. But, we've seen some proof there that it does actually work. At the very least, make sure these stakeholders know what's going on and how things are progressing. And, of course, as is common sense, make sure you're using the right communication channels that's appropriate to the message, is timely, and as many different channels as you can. And as much as you can, back up your claims, and you can do this with a really sort of strong pilot program when you're doing your alpha and your beta testing. Make sure it's backed up with hard data in the form of easy to access and easy to read reports. And then finally, for longer term success and buy-in, try and adopt a consultative approach. Make sure, of course, that the e-learning responds to business needs, but hopefully business needs that are brought to you by the function, rather than ones you impose on them. That will mean they're much more likely to take full ownership of the course and of rolling it out. But of course, as the true business partners that we all are in L&D and HR, we'll be well aware of those needs and we'll be fully prepared to support them, but we won't be leading them. E-learning, and in fact, training in general, won't always be the right solution to any of the problems. But where it is, set the right expectations for it. It's great for systems training, it's great for knowledge transfer, and it can set expectations. But of course, if it's about behavioural change, it can start the process, but I think is becoming widely accepted now, it's much better as part of a blended solution. But as with any formal learning intervention, the more solidly it's supported by the line manager in the point of pre and debriefs, what are you going to get from this, how are you going to change your behaviour as a result of it, and the more they support the transfer of that learning into the workplace, of course, the more effective any solution is going to be in actually seeing bottom line performance improvement. And like I said, at the end, expect the unexpected. The only guarantee I can give you is that whatever you foresee, however good your crystal ball is, something will be able to go wrong. And if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. So it's just a case of being flexible, patient, and I think above all, be that dog with a bone, be tenacious, then you'll get success.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks for listening. Any questions?